The Texas sun was a merciless blaze, but inside the barracks, the air was thick with tension that had nothing to do with the heat. Private Ethan Miller, 21 and fresh from basic training, stood frozen in the empty training yard, his heart pounding as Captain Ruiz's voice cut through the silence. "Miller, you're slipping. Focus or you're out." The words were sharp, but Ruiz's dark eyes held something else, something that made Ethan's breath catch. At that moment he knew this wasn't just about drills. It was about the unspoken pull between them, a secret that could ruin them both. Ethan was the newest recruit on the Fort Stockton base, a small-town kid trying to prove himself in a world that demanded perfection. Every day was a grind of drills, orders, and the constant pressure to fit in. But Captain Ruiz, 38, with a commanding presence that silenced rooms, was different. His gaze lingered on Ethan during lineups, his voice softened when they spoke one-on-one. It was subtle, but Ethan felt it. A connection that stirred something deep inside him, something he'd spent years trying to bury. That evening, after a grueling day of maneuvers, Ethan lingered in the training yard, catching his breath. The other recruits had already headed to the mess hall, leaving him alone with the hum of cicadas. He was wiping sweat from his brow when Ruiz appeared, his silhouette sharp against the fading light. "You're pushing too hard, Miller," Ruiz said, his tone quieter now, almost concerned. He stepped closer, close enough that Ethan could feel the weight of his presence. "You don't need to prove anything to them, just to me." Ethan's heart raced. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in his throat. He'd always known he was different, had felt it since high school when he'd hidden his crushes from everyone, his friends, his family, himself. Being gay in a place like this, where toughness was everything, felt like carrying a grenade with the pin half pulled. But Ruiz's words, his closeness, made Ethan feel seen in a way he hadn't expected. "I'm trying, sir," he managed, his voice low. "I just don't want to mess this up." Ruiz's eyes softened, and for a moment, the captain's guard dropped. "You won't, but you need to trust yourself." His hand brushed Ethan's arm, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt through him. It wasn't just encouragement. It was something more, something dangerous. Ethan's pulse quickened as Ruiz stepped back, his expression unreadable. "Get some rest, Miller. We've got a long week ahead." He turned and walked away, leaving Ethan alone with a mix of hope and fear swirling in his chest. The next few days were a blur of training, but Ethan couldn't shake the memory of that moment. Every time Ruiz called his name during drills, Ethan's stomach flipped. Their interactions were brief, a nod, a quiet word of advice, but each one felt charged, like a spark waiting to ignite. Ethan started staying late after training, hoping for another chance to talk, to understand what was happening. He wasn't sure if he was imagining it, but Ruiz seemed to linger too, finding reasons to check in on him. One night, after a particularly brutal session, Ethan was alone in the equipment room, stowing gear. The door clicked shut behind him, and he turned to see Ruiz standing there, his eyes intense. "You're still here," Ruiz said, his voice low. He stepped closer, the space between them shrinking. "Why?" Ethan swallowed hard, his heart hammering. I don't know, sir. I just feel like I need to be better." It was a half-truth. The real reason was standing right in front of him, and they both knew it. Ruiz's gaze didn't waver. "You're already better than most, Ethan." It was the first time he'd used Ethan's first name, and it hit like a shockwave. "But you're holding back. What's stopping you?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Ethan's breath caught as he realized Ruiz wasn't talking about training anymore. The room felt smaller, the air electric. He wanted to answer, to admit the truth he'd kept locked away, but fear clawed at him. What if he was wrong? What if this was a test he couldn't pass? "I don't know how to be myself," Ethan admitted, his voice barely a whisper. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said, and it left him exposed, vulnerable. Ruiz's expression shifted, a mix of understanding and something deeper, something that made Ethan's chest tighten. "You don't have to hide," Ruiz said softly, his hand resting on Ethan's shoulder, steady and warm. "Not with me." The words were a lifeline, but they came with a warning. Ethan knew what was at stake: his career, his place on the base, everything. Yet in that moment, with Ruiz so close, none of it mattered. The spark between them was undeniable, and Ethan felt himself leaning into it, unsure if it would save him or burn everything down. Ethan's world had shifted since that night in the equipment room. Captain Ruiz's words, "You don't have to hide," echoed in his mind, fueling a mix of hope and dread. Their connection was no longer just a fleeting spark. It was a fire they both fed with stolen glances and quiet conversations. But every moment they shared carried a risk, and Ethan felt the weight of it growing heavier each day on the Fort Stockton base. Their secret meetings began in the gaps of their schedules, brief exchanges after drills, a shared cigarette behind the barracks under the cover of dusk. Ruiz was careful, always scanning for prying eyes, but his guard dropped when they were alone. "You're getting stronger, Ethan," he said one evening, his voice low as they stood in the shadow of a storage shed. "But you're still holding back. Let go." His hand grazed Ethan's wrist, a touch that lingered just long enough to send a shiver through him. Ethan wanted to let go, to be the person Ruiz saw in him, but the fear of being caught, of being exposed, gnawed at him. The base was a pressure cooker of unspoken rules. Ethan overheard whispers from other recruits, casual slurs tossed around like jokes. Each one hit like a warning, reminding him how dangerous it was to feel the way he did. He'd spent years hiding his truth, growing up in a small Texas town where different was a dirty word. Now with Ruiz, he felt a pull to be himself, but the cost loomed large. What would happen if someone saw them? If the wrong person noticed? One night, after a late training session, Ethan found Ruiz waiting in the empty briefing room. The door clicked shut, and the air grew heavy with unspoken tension. "I need to tell you something," Ruiz said, his tone serious. Ethan's stomach dropped. He braced himself, expecting a warning to pull back, to end whatever this was. Instead, Ruiz stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm married, Ethan, but it's not what you think. It's complicated." The words hit like a punch. Ethan's heart sank, a mix of betrayal and confusion swirling inside him. Married? How could Ruiz have kept this from him? "I didn't mean to lie," Ruiz continued, his eyes searching Ethan's for understanding. "It's been over for years, emotionally. I stayed for duty, for appearances. But with you, it's different." His hand reached out, hesitating before resting on Ethan's arm. The touch was familiar, grounding, but it couldn't erase the sting of the revelation. Ethan wanted to believe him, to hold on to the connection they'd built. But doubt crept in. Was this real, or was he just a distraction for a man trapped in a life he didn't want? "I don't know what to say," Ethan admitted, his voice shaky. He stepped back, needing space to process. "You should have told me." Ruiz nodded, his expression heavy with regret. "I know. I was scared you'd walk away." The honesty in his voice disarmed Ethan, but it didn't erase the hurt. He felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't before. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about the lies they were both tangled in. The next day, Ethan threw himself into training, trying to drown out the noise in his head. But Ruiz's presence was inescapable. During a group drill, their eyes met, and Ethan felt the same pull, the same longing, despite the betrayal. He wanted to confront Ruiz, to demand answers, but the risk of being overheard kept him silent. Instead, he channeled his frustration into the exercises, pushing his body to the limit. A fellow recruit, Jenkins, noticed his intensity. "What's eating you, Miller?" he asked, his tone half joking, half suspicious. Ethan brushed it off, but the question lingered, a reminder that secrets had a way of surfacing. That evening, Ethan waited for Ruiz behind the barracks, his heart pounding with unresolved tension. When Ruiz appeared, the air between them crackled. "I can't stop thinking about you," Ethan said, his voice raw. "But I don't know if I can trust you." Ruiz's gaze softened, but there was pain in his eyes. "I'm trying to be honest now," he said. "I want this. Us. But we have to be careful. No one can know." Ethan nodded, torn between desire and doubt. The secrecy that once felt thrilling now felt like a cage, and he wasn't sure how long they could keep it locked. The Fort Stockton base buzzed with routine, but for Ethan Miller, every step felt like walking a tightrope. His connection with Captain Ruiz had deepened, a fragile thread woven through stolen moments and whispered confessions. But Ruiz's revelation about his marriage had cracked something in Ethan, a trust he wasn't sure he could rebuild. The secrecy that once fueled their bond now felt like a weight, and the fear of discovery loomed larger than ever. Ethan threw himself into drills, hoping the grind would quiet his doubts. But Ruiz's presence was a constant pull. During a morning briefing, their eyes met briefly, and Ethan's heart raced with a mix of longing and resentment. He wanted to believe Ruiz's claim that his marriage was a hollow obligation, but the sting of being kept in the dark lingered. Worse, the base was a pressure cooker of scrutiny. Recruits like Jenkins had started watching Ethan too closely, their offhand comments about outsiders cutting deeper than they knew. One evening, after a grueling obstacle course, Ethan lingered in the training yard, catching his breath. Ruiz approached, his steps deliberate. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low but urgent. Ethan tensed, expecting another confession. Instead, Ruiz's tone shifted to something colder. "I told someone, Ethan. My second-in-command, Harris. I had to. He was asking questions." The words hit like a betrayal, sharper than the marriage revelation. Ethan's chest tightened, his voice barely steady. "You what? You said no one could know." Ruiz's jaw clenched, his eyes flickering with guilt. Harris was getting suspicious. I told him it was nothing serious, just a lapse. I was protecting us. But Ethan didn't feel protected. He felt exposed, like a target painted on his back. "Protecting us? Or protecting yourself?" he shot back, his voice rising despite the risk. Ruiz stepped closer, his hand reaching out, but Ethan pulled away. "Don't. You had no right." The hurt in Ruiz's eyes was real, but it couldn't undo the damage. Ethan turned and walked away, his pulse pounding with anger and fear. The next day, the consequences hit. Jenkins and a few others cornered Ethan after drills, their smirks laced with malice. "Heard you're cozy with the captain," Jenkins said, his tone mocking. "Careful, Miller. That kind of thing doesn't fly here." The words were a gut punch, confirming Ethan's worst fears. Rumors were spreading, and Ruiz's confession to Harris had fueled them. Ethan kept his face neutral, muttering a denial. But inside, he was unraveling. The base, already a hostile place for someone like him, felt like a trap closing in. That night, Ethan's phone buzzed with a call from his mother. He hadn't spoken to his family in weeks, but the rumors had reached them, carried by a cousin stationed nearby. "Is it true, Ethan?" she asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Are you one of these people?" The words cut deeper than Jenkins' taunts. Ethan tried to explain, to say it wasn't what she thought, but her silence was deafening. "Your father can't handle this," she said, before hanging up. Ethan stared at the phone, his throat tight. His family, the one anchor he'd clung to, had turned their backs. Alone in the barracks, Ethan felt the walls closing in. He wanted to confront Ruiz, to demand why he'd risked everything. But part of him already knew. Ruiz was scared. Scared of losing his career, his reputation, his carefully constructed life. Ethan understood that fear, but it didn't soften the betrayal. He thought of their late-night talks, the way Ruiz had made him feel seen, and it hurt all the more to know it had been tainted by lies. Determined to clear his head, Ethan sought out the base's chaplain, hoping for guidance. Instead, he found a flyer for a local LGBTQ support group tucked into a community board. It was a small thing, but it sparked something in him, a flicker of hope. Maybe he wasn't as alone as he felt. Maybe there was a way to be himself without losing everything. But as he pocketed the flyer, Jenkins' voice echoed in his mind, a reminder that the fight was far from over. Ruiz's betrayal had set something in motion, and Ethan knew he'd have to face the fallout, whatever it cost. Ethan Miller's world felt like it was fracturing. The rumors sparked by Captain Ruiz's confession to Harris had spread like wildfire across the Fort Stockton base, turning whispers into open taunts. Every glance from his fellow recruits carried judgment, and Ethan's isolation grew. His family's rejection still stung, his mother's cold words replaying in his mind. But the flyer for the local LGBTQ support group he'd found was a lifeline he clung to, a small spark of defiance against the storm closing in. Training became a battleground. During a morning drill, Jenkins deliberately tripped Ethan in the obstacle course, muttering, "Watch your step, Miller." The snickers from others burned, but Ethan kept his head down, channeling his anger into the task. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of breaking him. But the weight of their hostility, combined with Ruiz's betrayal, made every moment feel like a test of his resolve. He hadn't seen Ruiz since their confrontation, and the absence gnawed at him, part longing, part fury. That evening, Ethan slipped off base to attend the support group meeting in a nearby community center. The room was filled with strangers, but their stories echoed his own. Fear of judgment, the struggle to be authentic in a world that often refused to accept them. A veteran named Alex, who had served openly after years of hiding, spoke about finding strength in community. "You don't have to do this alone," Alex said, meeting Ethan's eyes. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a flicker of belonging. He didn't share his story yet, but listening gave him courage. He wasn't just a recruit hiding a secret. He was part of something bigger. Back on base, the tension escalated. Jenkins and his crew escalated their harassment, leaving pointed notes in Ethan's bunk. Freak. Don't belong here. Each word was a dagger, but Ethan refused to let them define him. He started connecting with Alex and others from the group through encrypted messages, their support bolstering his resolve. Yet the betrayal from Ruiz lingered like an open wound. Ethan needed answers, and he couldn't avoid the captain forever. Late one night, Ethan found Ruiz alone in the training yard, checking equipment. The air crackled with unresolved tension as Ethan approached, his heart pounding. "Why did you do it?" he demanded, his voice low but sharp. "You told Harris, knowing what it would do to me." Ruiz froze, his shoulders tensing. When he turned, his eyes were heavy with regret. "I thought I could control it," he said. "Harris was digging, threatening to report me. I told him it was nothing to save us both. I was wrong." Ethan's fists clenched. "You saved yourself, not me. I'm the one they're tearing apart." Ruiz stepped closer, his voice urgent. "I never wanted this, Ethan. I care about you, more than I should. But I'm trapped too." The admission hit Ethan hard, stirring the feelings he'd tried to bury. He wanted to believe Ruiz, to hold on to the connection they'd shared, but trust was shattered. "You made your choice," Ethan said, stepping back. "Now I'm making mine." The next day, Ethan faced a new blow. His platoon leader called him in, citing concerns about unit cohesion. The rumors had reached command, and though no formal action was taken, the warning was clear: conform or face consequences. Ethan's stomach churned, but the support group's words echoed in his mind. He wasn't alone, and he wouldn't let fear silence him. He began documenting the harassment, sharing it with Alex, who connected him with an advocate for LGBTQ service members. The advocate urged Ethan to stand firm but cautious, warning that the military's old biases still lingered. As Ethan walked back to the barracks, he felt a shift inside him. The fear that had kept him hiding for years was giving way to resolve. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore, he was fighting for the right to exist as he was. Ruiz's betrayal had pushed him to the edge, but it also forced him to confront his own strength. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time Ethan felt ready to face it, no matter what came next. Ethan Miller stood at a crossroads. The Fort Stockton base, once a place of ambition, had become a crucible of fear and defiance. The rumors about his relationship with Captain Ruiz had spiraled, fueling harassment from recruits like Jenkins and a cold rejection from his family. Yet the support group Ethan found off base had ignited a spark of hope. With their backing and the guidance of an LGBTQ advocate, he was learning to stand firm, but the cost of being himself was steep, and the final reckoning was coming. The harassment intensified. Jenkins and his crew escalated their taunts, slipping notes under Ethan's bunk and whispering slurs during drills. Each jab tested his resolve, but Ethan refused to break. He reported the incidents to his advocate, who helped him file a formal complaint with the base's Equal Opportunity Office. The process was grueling, requiring Ethan to recount the rumors and harassment without naming Ruiz directly. He wasn't ready to expose their connection, not out of loyalty, but to protect himself from further fallout. The investigation stirred tension on the base, with some recruits siding with Jenkins, while others, quietly, began to respect Ethan's courage. Ruiz, meanwhile, faced his own consequences. Word of his lapse with Ethan had reached his wife, who filed for divorce, citing years of emotional distance. The news spread through the base, and Ruiz's authority began to crumble. During a training session, Ethan overheard a senior officer reprimanding Ruiz for personal indiscretions. Ruiz's eyes met Ethan's briefly, filled with a mix of shame and defiance, but he said nothing. Ethan felt a pang of guilt. He hadn't wanted to ruin Ruiz, but the betrayal still stung. Ruiz had chosen his career over their bond, and now both were slipping away. One evening, Ethan received a message from Alex, the veteran from the support group. "Come to the meeting tonight. You need this." Ethan slipped off base, his heart heavy, but hopeful. The group welcomed him warmly, and for the first time he shared his story. The connection with Ruiz, the betrayal, the rejection from his family. The room listened without judgment, and Alex clasped his shoulder. "You're not defined by their hate," he said. "You're stronger than that." The words sank in, and Ethan felt a weight lift. He wasn't alone, and that gave him the strength to keep going. Back on base, the investigation concluded with Jenkins and 2 others receiving formal reprimands for harassment. It wasn't a full victory. Ethan still felt eyes on him during drills, but it was a step. The platoon leader, wary of further complaints, began treating Ethan with cautious respect. Ethan's confidence grew, and he started connecting with a few recruits who admired his stand. One, a quiet soldier named Carter, even apologized for staying silent. "Didn't know you were going through that," Carter said. "You've got guts." The gesture was small but meaningful, a crack in the wall of hostility. Ruiz, stripped of his command pending review, approached Ethan one last time in the training yard at dusk. "I messed up, Ethan," he said, his voice raw. "I thought I could protect us both, but I only hurt you. I'm sorry." Ethan studied him, the man who'd once made him feel seen, now diminished by his own choices. "I wanted to trust you," Ethan said quietly. "But I'm done hiding. For you or anyone." Ruiz nodded, his shoulders slumping. "You're better than I was," he said, before walking away. Ethan watched him go, a mix of relief and loss settling in his chest. In the weeks that followed, Ethan leaned into his newfound strength. He stayed active in the support group, finding a community that embraced him fully. His family remained distant, but he began writing letters to his mother, hoping to rebuild that bridge one day. The base was still a challenge, but Ethan carried himself differently now, unafraid to meet the stares of those who judged him. He wasn't just surviving, he was claiming his place. As he stood in the training yard one evening, the Texas sky stretching wide above, Ethan realized he'd found something more valuable than Ruiz's approval or his family's acceptance: himself. The road ahead wasn't easy, but he was ready to walk it, knowing he wasn't alone. The fight to be himself had cost him dearly, but it had also set him free.